Hi, it's Holly Beverly. I'm recording my context book review of The Black Swan for LIS 708. So I'm opening up the PowerPoint. Okay, so I was initially swayed by Niall Ferguson's synopsis of Nassim Nicholas Taleb's bestseller, The Black Swan, as it led me to purchase the book that is recognized as a New York Times bestseller. The theory of The Black Swan, much different than the movie with ballet and psychological thrillers, describes how, quote, a black swan is an event, positive or negative, that is deemed improbable yet causes massive consequences. It was written on the back cover of the book, and I think in the Amazon synopsis as well. Events and occurrences take place regardless of their predictability or plausibility, and society is left with certain consequences. The theory seems intentionally vague to allow space for application within a variety of contextual settings on the part of the author. And he sets out with a lot of theories surrounding this black swan concept or idea as it relates to military, medical, just social procedures that we see more often. The discourse of the book, it begins to sound a lot like someone who has been talking to themselves for quite a while, and it just kind of leaves you wondering about the pessimist's dilemma. So like, okay, so these things that you can't predict and can't foresee happen, but then what do you do? And he doesn't get into that portion of his thought until probably the last third of the book, I would say. Because the question is, library and information professionals specifically, where do we go from there, will determine the course of the research that we do. So move to the next slide. So impactful and unpredictable events. These are the kind of events that he's focusing on throughout the duration of the book. I quoted the back cover synopsis as well a little bit here. In talking about uncertainty at large. So Taleb urges readers to question their own knowledge and understanding, remaining skeptical of one's perceptions, to allow for the unknown to reveal something to us or to render us more prepared for serendipitous discovery. Taleb brings up this quote, how do we know what we know? How do we know that what we have observed from given objects and events suffices to enable us to figure out their other properties? There are traps built into any kind of knowledge gained from observation. How can we figure out properties of the infinite unknown based on the finite known? Let me set this on page 40. So in dealing with randomness, or that infinite unknown, there has to be space left for some uncertainty, even in research. As researchers and library professionals that specialize in information, we have to acknowledge that there's always more to learn and another better question to ask. In all the information we sort through, we ought to consider each new piece of information with a degree of skepticism. This is applicable in the library setting for sure. The critical thinkings that we practice become more refined the more we can work with that uncertainty, accepting it as we see it, knowing that a whole truth might be different from our perception. So just listed the quote there for you here. So he goes and delves into this concept of the military unknown. At one point in his life, he was meeting with some military leaders and noticing that they were the only ones that were intellectually honest about intellectual curiosity, and knowing that sometimes the most successful outcome might be, to save money rather than take a big risk. So, just that intellectual process that he experienced with some military members that he met. So his quote that he mentioned The only thing that I know is that we know precious little about them, black swans, but that it was their property to sneak up on us, and that attempts at platonifying them led to additional misunderstandings. Military people can understand such things, and the idea became recently prevalent in military circles with the expression unknown unknown, as opposed to the known unknown. And he talks about this on page 127. So additional misunderstandings can result from the attempt to make sense of things after they have occurred, because we attach a narrative story to them that makes something that made no sense have this spin of practicality. At another point in the book, Taleb referenced the invention of penicillin as serendipitous discovery. And we can relate this to research a little bit because it was scientific research, a different nature, but in library research is the relatable link. So this life-saving medicine of penicillin that impacted individuals for generations to come wasn't the initial objective that the scientists set out to manufacture, and yet, it's what we still use today. So I want to talk about that idea of innovation as facilitated serendipity next. And just talking about some of the internal biases that we have as researchers and information professionals, and how it's really important to just keep an open mind and stay humble. So as practitioners in the information professions, we provide access to information through a variety of formats and subject matter, depending on the library that we work in. But the accessibility can allow for serendipitous discovery. Even more significant, I think, is the power to guide users to ask better questions that will structure their research and their quest for information. So a quote from the book, he talks about the problem of ideas being sticky. So once we produce a theory, how difficult it can be to change our minds, especially on the basis of weak evidence. So he says, I'm starting reading the quote about halfway through, and he says, you'll have difficulty interpreting subsequent information that contradicts these opinions, even if this new information is obviously more accurate. So talking about the kind of bias that we have, and just that challenge of reversing what we think we know already. So carefully selecting the sources of data that we use to formulate our opinions becomes even more critical. So working in this class to identify really when people come in, what kind of questions are they asking and what data is going to be the most relevant for their search, answering their questions, that we can help them refine the questions as well. So once a premise for research is formed, hard as we try to keep an open mind, it can be tricky to adapt new information to fit your initial hypotheses. But it's another area in which we ought to hold some space and make allowances for that aspect of the unknown in research and beyond academic contexts. However, just because people buy a book doesn't mean that they'll read the book cover to cover. This one specifically, I wouldn't go out of my way to recommend this book to library and information professionals because it's much lengthier than I think it needed to be, and the narrative voice, after a while, it just starts to sound redundant and very theoretical. So although the concepts of the book are very intriguing conceptually, it's what drew me to the book, and I'm glad I read it, but I'd just be a little bit wary to recommend it. But if I encountered someone with a mind for philosophy that enjoys reading theory, I might refer them to Taleb's book. All right. Look forward to hearing your thoughts and engaging with some of your other posts as well. All right.